She was still scrubbing the floor when she heard the name that would change everything. Not her name. It was never her name they called in this house. It was his. Kang Joon-Ho. She heard it the way you hear thunder before you understand a storm is coming. Distant, low, carrying weight it had not yet delivered. The two men in the entrance hall spoke at once, handed Mrs. Choi an envelope, and left without waiting for a response. They already knew there was only one response possible. Amara Osei wrung out her scrubbing brush, moved to the next tile, and kept her breathing even. She had learned a long time ago that the safest thing she could do in this house was to be invisible, to be the hands that cleaned without being the person who cleaned, to occupy space without taking up space, to hear everything and react to nothing. She had been doing it since she was 9 years old. Before we go any further, if you are watching this and you are not yet subscribed, please do that right now. Hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Every single week on this channel, we tell stories like this one. Stories about love that costs something, betrayal that changes everything, and people who were counted out and refused to stay down. Hit the like button too. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps this channel reach more people who need exactly this kind of story. Now, I need you to stay with me, because what happens to this girl next is going to break something in you before it builds it back stronger. Let's go. She had learned, a long time ago, that the safest thing she could do in this house was to be invisible. Her mother had died on a Tuesday in October in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and something else Amara could never name. And the last thing her mother had said to her, really said before the words stopped coming, was that she was going to be all right, that her auntie was coming, that she would be taken care of. Her mother had believed that completely. Amara had spent 14 years learning what taken care of actually looked like in this house. It looked like waking at 5 in the morning before the son and the family. It looked like ironing Yuna's clothes and cooking Mrs. Choi's breakfast and folding towels with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had long ago stopped expecting praise for the work and started expecting punishment for its absence. It looked like eating whatever was left. It looked like a mattress on the floor of a room that had no mirror and one window that faced a wall. It looked like being called girl instead of Amara for so many years that some mornings she had to press her hand to the cover of her sketchbook and read her own name written there just to remember it fully belonged to her. Amara. Amara Osei, her mother's daughter, her own person. The sketchbook was the only thing in the world nobody had given her and nobody could take. She had found it abandoned in a recycling pile 3 years ago, half the pages already used, the rest clean and waiting, and she had filled every remaining page with the only place her mind went when her hands were doing someone else's work. Dresses, gowns, coats with structured shoulders and waists that moved like water, fabrics she had only touched in her imagination, silhouettes that came to her in the gray early morning hours, the way music comes to people who were born to make it, not as an idea, but as a memory of something she had not done yet. She had never shown them to anyone. In this house, the things you loved were the things that could be used against you. She was still thinking about this, still on her knees, still scrubbing, still invisible, when Yuna's voice split the air of the dining room like something thrown at a wall. Absolutely not, Amara's brush stopped. I am not marrying a man in a wheelchair. I do not care what you owe. I do not care who he is. You fix your own mess. Yuna, lower your voice. Fix your own mess. The chair scraped. The heel struck. The door swung. Silence. Then the specific silence of a room that still has one person in it who is thinking very hard and very fast. Amara did not move. She was in the corridor, close enough to the dining room doorway to hear everything, far enough away to have heard nothing. This was the geometry of her life. Always close enough to be useful, always far enough away to be denied. She should have moved then. She knew she should have moved. She did not move. She heard the chair push back from the dining table. She heard footsteps crossing the marble floor. And then she heard nothing, just the quality of attention that a room takes on when the person inside it has turned around and found something useful. When she looked up, Mrs. Choi was standing in the dining room doorway, looking directly at her. Amara had survived many things in this house. She had survived hunger and silence, and the specific cruelty of being treated as though her feelings were a kind of presumption. She had survived Yuna's casual contempt and the way guests sometimes looked through her at dinner parties, as if she were part of the furniture. But she had never been looked at the way Mrs. Choi was looking at her now, not with cruelty, with relief. "Come in," Mrs. Choi said. "Sit down." Amara set down the brush. She stood. She walked through the door and sat in the chair that Yuna had just vacated, and she did not allow her hands to shake because she understood, in the part of her that had always understood things before she had words for them, that whatever happened in the next 5 minutes would be the most important thing that had ever happened to her. The wedding contract was already on the table. Mrs. Choi did not waste time. Waste was for people who were not afraid, and Mrs. Choi, Amara now understood, was terrified. "You will go in Yuna's place," she said. Amara looked at the contract. She looked at the name. She looked at the amount of the debt listed in smaller print near the bottom of the page. A number so large it seemed abstract, like a distance rather than a sum of money. She looked up at Mrs. Choi. "I am not your daughter," she said. "I am not your property. You do not have the right to do this." "No," Mrs. Choi agreed, with the calm of someone who has already moved past the question of rights into the simpler territory of power. "I don't, but I have something better than a right. I have Kang Joon-Ho's men who are waiting for my call, and I have 14 years of records showing you as a household employee with access to every room in this house. A theft claim, an illegal worker claim. It would take me 20 minutes and cost you everything." She folded her hands. "Or you sign. You leave. You consider us even. You start your life somewhere else." Amara sat with this. Outside, Seoul moved through its morning, the sound of traffic, the distant beat of construction, the ordinary world continuing in its ordinary way, indifferent to what was being decided in this room. She thought about her mother. She thought about the dress on page 47 of her sketchbook, a deep emerald evening gown with a train that swept like a sentence that was not finished yet. She thought about the mattress on the floor of her room upstairs, and the single window that faced a wall, and the name she had to read off the cover of her sketchbook some mornings to remember it was fully hers. She picked up the pen. "If I do this," she said, and her voice was steady, and she would carry the memory of that steadiness for the rest of her life. "I want it in writing that I am released from every claim you have ever made against me, every debt, every obligation, everything." Mrs. Choi blinked. She had not expected a counteroffer. Then she nodded. "Fine." Amara signed. She went upstairs. She put 3 dresses, her wash bag, and her sketchbook into a bag. She did not take anything that had been given to her by this family, because nothing given by this family had ever actually been given. It had been loaned, at interest, with conditions she had never been shown. She came back downstairs. Yuna was at the top of the staircase. She must have heard. She was standing very still, one hand on the banister, wearing that particular expression she got when she had gotten what she wanted, and the getting of it tasted worse than she expected. Amara looked up at her. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say to a woman who had watched someone else's life be handed away and called it not my problem. She walked out of the front door, into the cold Seoul morning, and got into the black car that was already waiting. She pressed her sketchbook against her chest. She did not look back. She did not cry. Not yet. The Kang estate arrived at the end of a long private road that followed the curve of the Han River, and the first thing Amara thought when she saw it was that it looked exactly like the man she had been told she was going to marry. Beautiful, in a way that had nothing to do with warmth. Precise in a way that felt like a warning. All dark glass and black stone and controlled light, every angle deliberate, nothing soft anywhere. A place designed to communicate that the person inside it had decided, at some point, that softness was a liability. She was brought through a side entrance by 2 men who did not speak to her. She walked down a corridor that was so quiet she could hear her own breathing, and decided that if this place was going to make her small, she would need more air in her lungs than usual. She straightened her spine. She lifted her chin. She walked into the room at the end of the corridor and saw the back of him for the first time. Broad shoulders, dark hair, a jaw she could see even in profile. Hands on the wheels of a matty black wheelchair with the stillness of a man who had decided long ago that stillness was its own form of power. And she understood immediately, in the specific way that the body understands things before the mind has finished its argument, that this was not going to be what she had prepared for. She did not know yet what it was going to be. She only knew it was not that. "She is here, sir." The chair turned. Kang Joon-Ho looked at her. She had braced herself for pity. She had braced herself for arrogance, for entitlement, for the particular contempt of a powerful man looking at a woman he had purchased. She had wrapped herself in the armor of every hard thing she had survived and told herself she was ready for whatever form the hardness took in this room. She was not ready for his eyes. Not because they were kind. They were not kind. They were dark and still, and reading her the way a cartographer reads unmapped terrain, not with judgment, but with the specific intensity of someone who needs to understand exactly what they are looking at. Every part of her face received the same attention. Nothing was skimmed. Nobody had ever looked at Amara Osei that carefully. It lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then he looked at Director Shin. "This is not her." His voice was low and completely even, the voice of a man who had not needed volume in years because everything he said carried weight without it. Director Shin explained, quickly, nervously, the substitution, the original arrangement, the Choi family's decision. His voice ran slightly fast, the way voices do when the person speaking is not sure how the information is going to land and wants to be finished before impact. Joon-Ho said nothing. The silence was so complete that Amara heard the Han River outside through the glass. Then he looked back at her, and something shifted in the room. Something she could not name and would spend months trying to. Not warmth, not welcome. Something more dangerous and more interesting than either of those things. "She stays," he said. "Sir?" "She stays." Director Shin went very quiet. And Amara, who had not slept properly in 36 hours, who had signed her life over to a stranger that morning, who was holding her sketchbook against her chest like the only true north she had ever owned, looked at Kang Joon-Ho directly, held his gaze without flinching, and said, "I did not come here to be assessed like inventory. If you have something to say to me, say it to my face, not around it." The silence after this was of a completely different quality. Director Shin appeared to stop breathing. 2 men by the door exchanged the specific look of people who have worked for someone long enough to know when something unprecedented has just occurred. Joon-Ho looked at her, and she saw it. Just barely, just for a second, gone almost before it arrived. The ghost of something crossing his face that his control could not entirely contain. Not anger. Something that looked, if she had to give it a name, she was not ready to give it, like recognition. He said nothing. But he did not look away. Neither did she. The marriage happened on a Thursday morning in a room with gray walls and overhead lighting, and a magistrate who performed the ceremony with the practiced efficiency of a man who had stopped attaching meaning to the words a long time ago. Amara wore the dark blue dress she had packed, the only good thing she owned that was genuinely hers, bought with 3 months of secretly saved grocery change 2 years ago, and kept hidden at the back of the wardrobe, where Yuna never looked because Yuna never looked at anything that was not already hers. Joon-Ho wore charcoal. He sat straight in his chair with the posture of a man attending a shareholder meeting. He signed when asked. He did not look at her during the ceremony. She did not look at him. They were strangers performing a ritual that did not belong to them for reasons that had nothing to do with what the ritual was supposed to mean. Amara knew this, and yet, standing in that gray room, listening to words about commitment and permanence being spoken over 2 people who had chosen nothing, she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not hope. She was too intelligent for hope this early. Something quieter than hope. Something that sat lower in the body. The sense that she had just stepped onto a road that was going to take her somewhere she could not see yet, but was real. Somewhere that existed. Somewhere that, unlike every room she had stood in for the last 14 years, had her name on the door. She did not know yet what that place looked like. She only knew she was walking toward it. Life in the Kang estate in the first weeks was a study in controlled distance. Joon-Ho was present in the way that weather is present, felt everywhere, the thing that determined the temperature of every room, but rarely encountered directly. He took his meals in his study. He held calls that lasted hours in a language of numbers and power that Amara could hear through walls and never fully decode. He moved through the estate with the deliberate efficiency of a man who had rebuilt every habit and routine from the ground up after the chair and refused to let the rebuilding show. The staff were careful. They performed their work with the precision of people who understood that sloppiness had consequences and had chosen comfort over pride in that calculation. Amara watched all of this and said nothing and learned everything. She learned that Director Shin was the most important person in the building after Joon-Ho, that he functioned as translator, buffer, executor, and, she suspected, the closest thing to a friend that Kang Joon-Ho allowed himself, which meant a relationship of total professional loyalty that occasionally trembled at the edges with something warmer that neither of them acknowledged. She learned that the two youngest housemaids, Jeon and Sora, were not frightened of the estate the way the older staff were. They were bored by it and looking for something interesting to happen, which meant they became, without any formal negotiation, the first people in the building who treated Amara like a person rather than a variable. She learned that Madame Seo, who ran the household with the iron authority of someone who had confused devotion with ownership, looked at Amara with an expression that was not cruelty but grief, the specific grief of a woman who had loved someone who was gone and had not yet found a way to put that love somewhere safe. "You are not her," Madame Seo said one morning, quietly, in the kitchen, when they were alone. Amara looked at her. "I know," she said. "I am not trying to be." Something moved in Madame Seo's face. She left without responding. But something had shifted. Something too small to name yet. A degree of angle, a fraction of temperature, and she learned the studio. She found it on her fourth night, following the feeling of the house the way you follow the sound of water in the dark. Not a plan, just an instinct, moving through corridors that smelled of something old and preserved until she reached the door on the third floor that was slightly open and pushed it and stepped inside and stopped. The smell hit her first, fabric and chalk and something floral and faded. The perfume of a person, she understood, long after the person was gone. Then, the light. The north-facing windows were enormous, and the Seoul night through them was its own kind of illumination, the blue-black sky and the gold of the city below, a palette that made everything in the room visible in the precise way that painters seek and rarely find. Then the work. Bolts of fabric against the far wall, a dress form in the corner wearing an unfinished coat, just the structure, the inner architecture, the skeleton of something that had been abandoned midway through becoming itself. Sketches everywhere, pinned to boards, layered on the work table, corners lifting with age. The handwriting in the notes beside each sketch was small and very precise. The handwriting of someone who thought carefully before committing anything to paper. Amara stood in the doorway for a very long time. Then she walked to the work table. She pulled out a stool. She opened her sketchbook to a clean page, and she drew. She drew for 4 hours without stopping. She drew until her hand ached in the good way, the way that means you have been using the part of yourself that was made for the thing you are doing. She drew the coat on the dress form from 3 different angles, finished it in her mind and on the page, gave it a collar it had not yet been given, and a hem that moved the way good hems move, like a decision rather than an afterthought. She drew a dress that had been living in the back of her mind for 3 years and had never had a surface large enough to come out on. She drew it in full, with notes in the margins, with fabric suggestions in the corner, with the kind of attention that means I intend to make this, not just I imagined it. She drew until the Seoul skyline went gray with morning. She did not know as she drew that 3 floors below, Kang Joon-Ho was awake, as he was always awake in the hours before dawn, in the chair beside the window of his study, doing the particular kind of not sleeping that is not rest, but is all the body will allow, and had seen the light come on in the 3rd floor studio. He had not moved for a long time when he saw it. He had not gone to investigate. He had simply sat with the window and the light above him, and the Han River below, and something in his chest, that he was not going to name and would not examine and would absolutely not give any more attention than it had already taken without his permission. He was still sitting with it when the morning came. The first crack happened 3 weeks later during a thunderstorm that knocked out the power to the entire East Wing at midnight. Amara took a wrong turn in the dark. She pushed open a door. She found him on the floor. He had been attempting the transfer from chair to bed alone. The motorized lift that assisted with this had cut out with the power, and his night aid had left early, and something had gone wrong in the movement, some calculation of weight and angle that the body makes automatically until it doesn't. And now he was on the floor beside his chair, with one hand flat on the footboard of the bed, and the expression on his face was the most unguarded thing she had ever seen from a human being. Raw, furious, and under both of those things, deep and barely visible and doing everything it could to stay invisible, humiliated. "Leave," he said. His voice was still controlled. It was the most impressive thing she had ever heard, that his voice could still be controlled while the rest of him was completely exposed. She did not leave. She was across the room before she had decided to move. She found his chair in the dark by feel, checked the wheels, positioned it correctly. She crouched beside him, not hovering, not performing care, just present and practical, the way she was present and practical with everything hard. And she helped him up. No ceremony, no softness that would feel like pity, just 2 hands and a solid base and the clear, simple physics of it. When he was in his chair, breathing in the careful, controlled way of someone who is using breath to manage something that has nothing to do with breath, he would not look at her. She stood. She waited a moment. Then she said, "Being helped is not the weakness. Deciding you would rather stay on the floor than accept it, that is the weakness." She left. She walked down the dark corridor back to her room, and she sat on the edge of her bed in the dark, and she put her face in her hands and she breathed. Not because she was afraid, not because the encounter had shaken her in any frightening way, because she knew that expression. She had worn it herself so many times, in so many rooms in that house in which she was not allowed to be a full person. The expression of someone who has been reduced and is refusing to let it show and is failing at the refusal. She had looked like that at 9 years old on the floor of a kitchen, crying because she had broken a plate and Mrs. Choi's voice was coming down the hallway. She had looked like that at 16, sitting in the back of a school she had been allowed to attend 2 days a week, listening to other girls talk about their futures and keeping her own face completely still. She had looked like that at 22, finding her sketchbook had been moved and understanding that someone had looked through it and said nothing and put it back, and understanding what the saying nothing meant, that it was not worth commenting on, that her dreams were not worth a response. She knew exactly what that expression cost to carry. She knew exactly how much energy it took to hold it in place while everything underneath it was breaking. She did not sleep that night, but something in her was different in the morning. Something had been decided without her conscious participation, the way the most important decisions always are. She was not going to treat Kang Joon-Ho the way the world had treated her. She was going to see him. The seeing happened gradually, in increments so small she almost missed them. He asked her opinion one morning about a scheduling decision, something minor, the rearrangement of a household calendar item, and she answered honestly, and he implemented the change without comment, and that was the entire exchange, but it sat in her chest for 3 days, because nobody in her life had ever asked her opinion about anything, and then acted on it without requiring her to be grateful. He noticed when she did not eat. She did not know when he started noticing. She only knew that on the morning she forgot, absorbed in a sketch she had been carrying in her head since 3 in the morning, or simply not hungry in the way that sometimes happened when her mind was very full. A plate would appear beside her coffee, delivered by Director Shin with an expression of studied neutrality that was the most transparent thing she had ever seen on a human face. He said nothing about the studio. He did not bring it up. He did not knock on the door when the light was on at 2 in the morning, which it increasingly was. He left her to it completely, the way someone leaves a fire they have decided to let burn. And then, One morning, she arrived to find her sketchbook open on the work table where she had left it the night before, and Joon-Ho beside it, and the quality of his attention directed at the pages was the quality she recognized from that first meeting. The careful, complete, nothing-skimmed attention of a man who takes things seriously. He did not pretend he had not been there. She walked in, stopped, looked at him looking at her work. He looked up. "These are extraordinary," he said, not a compliment, a conclusion, the tone of a man who has evaluated something with full attention and arrived at a finding. "Thank you," she said. She left quickly. She was smiling before she reached the staircase, and she was furious about it and kept smiling anyway, all the way back to her room, where she sat on the bed and pressed her hands to her face and told herself very firmly that this meant nothing, and was aware in the same breath that she was lying. She was aware also, though she did not examine it directly, the way you do not look directly at the sun, that something had been different in the studio in the months since she had started using it. Something had been moved back into order, fabrics refolded on the shelves, a new lamp on the work table, better positioned, the light warmer, a corkboard put up on the wall facing the work table, empty, waiting. She had not put these things there. She did not ask where they came from. Some things you hold without examining, because examining them would change them, and what they are before they are examined is too precious to risk. The outside world arrived on a Tuesday like a stone through glass. The back organization sent a representative to the gate. The message was courteous in its language and a declaration of war in everything beneath the language. They had observed the marriage. They had drawn conclusions about alliances. They were unhappy with those conclusions. They wished to discuss this. Joon-Ho refused the meeting. She was in the studio 4 nights later when the alarm went off. The sound was not loud. It was a tone, low and insistent, the kind of sound designed to reach sleeping people rather than startle them. But it was followed immediately by footsteps, fast ones, coordinated, the sound of a building reorganizing itself around a threat, then voices, then a door, then silence of a different texture from the usual one. A man appeared in the studio doorway and moved her, efficiently and without explanation, to a room on the 2nd floor with no windows and a door that locked from the inside. She sat in that room for 3 hours. She was not afraid, which surprised her. She was very still, the way she had learned to be very still in difficult situations, and she was thinking clearly, which was also something she had learned, that fear is a luxury and clarity is a tool, and she had always needed tools more than luxuries. She was thinking about Joon-Ho, not about his safety specifically, though that was underneath everything, a constant low note she was not ready to examine. She was thinking about what it meant to run an empire that people wanted to destroy, to sit in that chair, in that estate, with that history, an attempt already made on your life, the evidence of it present every day in the body you now occupied, and keep showing up. Keep running the thing. Keep being unreachable because the alternative was being something diminished, and this man would not be diminished. She was thinking that she understood that particular stubbornness in a way that had nothing to do with their circumstances being similar and everything to do with the quality of it, the specific texture of a pride that is not arrogance, but is the last line of defense between a person and annihilation. She recognized it because it was the same as hers. When Director Shin came for her 3 hours later, he looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize as his version of being moved. "It's handled," he said. "He wanted me to tell you personally. You are safe." "Is he all right?" A pause. "He is occupied. But he asked me to come to you first, before any other communication. Those were his exact instructions." She nodded. She went back to her room. She did not sleep. She cracked the door at some point, 2, maybe 3 in the morning, to get water, and she saw him at the end of the corridor. He was outside her door. He was sitting very still with his hands on his wheels and his head very slightly bowed. Not in defeat. Nothing about Kang Joon-Ho ever read as defeat, but in the posture of a person who is watching over something they have not yet found the words to claim. He did not know she was watching. She watched him for a long time. She went back to her bed. She lay in the dark and said to herself, with the same firmness she had used when making every hard decision of her adult life, "Do not do this. This is not safe. You do not know enough about this man to trust what you are feeling. You have been starved of being seen for so long that you are mistaking being witnessed for being loved, and those are not the same thing, and you know better." She said all of this. She believed none of it, because she knew the difference between being witnessed and being seen, and what was happening outside that door was not a man keeping watch over an asset. It was a man sitting outside the room of a person who had become, without either of them planning it or agreeing to it or giving it any of the formal acknowledgement it was due, necessary to him. She knew the difference. She lay in the dark and she let herself know it. Yuna came on a Wednesday. She arrived with luggage, which told Amara everything before a single word was exchanged. Not a visit, a bid. She stood in the entrance hall in a coat that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, and told Director Shin, then Madame Seo, then anyone who would process the information, that she had made a mistake, that she had been afraid, that she was ready now, that she was the right one, that this had all been a misunderstanding that could still be corrected. Joon-Ho did not come out of his study. Amara received her in the sitting room because there was no version of herself that was going to let this happen in the hallway, like an argument between strangers. They sat. Yuna was beautiful, as she had always been. She had the particular beauty that this kind of life produces. Polished at every surface, nothing unintentional. The beauty of someone who has had the time and resources to make their appearance a project. She looked at Amara across the low table between them with an expression that was doing a great deal of work to look like remorse. "I made a mistake," she said. "You made a choice," Amara said. "And then you stood at the top of the stairs and watched me leave and did nothing. Those are two different things." Yuna's jaw moved. "I was scared. I was scared too. I was terrified. I signed a contract in a room with a woman who had spent 15 years making sure I had no options, and I was completely alone and I was terrified." Amara kept her voice even, not cold, even. "The difference is that my terror didn't cost anyone else anything. Yours cost me everything I owned." The room was very quiet. "I am not here to punish you," Amara said. "I don't want that. But I need you to understand that what you are describing as a mistake was actually a series of choices that you made at my expense, consciously, while looking directly at me." Yuna looked at her hands. Then, Director Shin was at the door with a look that meant, "Now." Amara excused herself. What followed changed everything. Director Shin had been building a file for 8 months. He laid it in front of Amara on the work table in the studio, the only surface large enough for it, and walked her through it with the careful precision of a man who understands that what he is about to say cannot be unsaid, and is making sure every word is exact. The debt was not an accident. It had been engineered. Mrs. Choi had been in contact with the back organization for over 2 years. Not as a victim, not as someone caught up in something beyond her, but as a participant, as a provider of information, of routes, of schedules, of the particular gaps in a security detail that open when a person moves between a building and a car at the same time on the same day of every week. 18 months ago, Kang Joon-Ho had moved between a building and a car. He had done it at the same time on the same day of the week that he always did. And someone had made sure the right people knew exactly when and where and how. The bullet had not killed him, but the bullet had not been the only thing it was supposed to take. Hana, the woman he had been meant to marry, the woman Madame Seo had loved like a daughter, the woman whose unfinished coat still stood on the dress form in the studio that Amara now used every night, had been in the car. She had not survived. Amara sat with this for a very long time. She sat in the chair at the work table and she looked at the unfinished coat on the dress form and she thought about all of it. The 9-year-old girl, the mattress, the sketchbook, the contract, the car, all of it deliberate, all of it connected, all of it designed by a woman who had looked at the people around her and calculated what each of them was worth in the specific currency of her own survival. She had calculated Amara at dispensable. She had calculated Joon-Ho at useful to destroy. She had calculated Hana at acceptable loss. Amara did not cry. She had expected to cry. Instead, she felt something that she recognized after a moment as a kind of terrible clarity, the feeling of a story you have been living inside finally becoming legible. All the confusion resolved into shape, all the fog burned away. She understood what had happened. She understood all of it. She also understood what she was going to do. She went to Joon-Ho's study. She knocked. "Come in." She laid every document on his desk, every record, every date, every name. She stood on the other side of the desk, and she told him everything Director Shin had told her, clearly, with no performance and no cushioning, because he was not a man who wanted cushioning, and she was not a woman who provided it. He listened without moving. The only thing that changed while she spoke was his hands, the way they settled on the arms of his chair, not gripping, not white-knuckled, but with the particular pressure of a man who is directing the whole enormous force of what he is feeling somewhere it will not show. When she finished, the room was silent. She waited. He looked up from the desk, and for the first time since she had walked into this house, since she had walked into any house, maybe since she was 9 years old in a hospital corridor, waiting for news that was only going to be one kind of news. Someone looked at her, and she did not see assessment or calculation or the preliminary working out of how she might be useful. She saw grief. She saw rage. She saw the specific pain of a man who has spent 18 months asking himself what he missed and has just been handed the answer, and underneath all of it, looking directly at her with a steadiness and a weight that she felt in her whole body, she saw her, herself, seen, completely, without editing. "Amara," he said, just her name, in his voice, in this room where she had once been spoken about as if she were not present, just her name, and it was the most complete sentence she had ever heard. "I know," she said softly. "Handle this first. I will be here." He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he picked up his phone. His voice when he spoke into it was very quiet and very final. "Find all of them," he said. "Everyone." He was not a man who said things twice. He was not a man who needed to. What followed was the work of a man who had been patient for 18 months and was patient no longer. The back organization ceased to function as an organization within 6 days, not through violence, through the particular precision of a man who understands that the most permanent destruction is structural. Financial systems collapsed. Evidence packages arrived at law enforcement agencies in Seoul, Tokyo, and London simultaneously. Key figures found themselves facing charges that had nothing to do with Kang Joon-Ho directly, and everything to do with the paper trail that Director Shin and 2 other people had spent 8 months building with the care of people constructing something that would last. Mrs. Choi received her documents on a Thursday morning. Her lawyers called her by Thursday afternoon to advise her that there was no argument worth making. She did not fight it. Some people, when the structure that has protected them is finally removed, turn out to have nothing underneath it. No core, no center, just the structure, all the way down. Yuna came back one last time. She did not come with luggage this time. She did not come with the performance of remorse or the architecture of an argument. She came early in the morning, alone, in clothes that were expensive but worn, the clothes of someone who had stopped caring about what they communicated. Amara met her at the gate. They stood in the cold morning air, and the light was the gray gold of Seoul in autumn, and Yuna looked, for the first time since Amara had known her, like exactly her age and not a performance of it. "I knew more than I said," Yuna said. "Not everything, but enough. Enough to have said something. Enough to have done something differently." She stopped. "I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself that you could handle it, that you were stronger than me." She looked at Amara. "But that wasn't it. I was just a coward, and I dressed it up in something that sounded like respect for your strength." Amara listened. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Yuna said. "I just needed you to know that I know." The light was coming up slowly over the river. Amara thought about forgiveness, what it actually was, stripped of the performance of it, stripped of the version that is really just a request for the other person to stop making you feel guilty. Real forgiveness. The kind that is not for the person being forgiven, but for the person doing the forgiving. The kind that is not a gift, but a release. Setting down a thing you have been carrying so long the carrying has become the habit. Go and live your life, Amara said finally. Genuinely, not the life your mother built or the life that was supposed to make someone else comfortable. Your actual life. She looked at Yuna directly. And don't come back to mine. Yuna nodded. She left. Amara watched her go and felt the release happen. Felt the thing she had been carrying since she was 9 years old, since she first understood that the people who were supposed to protect her had decided she was not worth the cost of protection, come loose from somewhere deep in her chest and simply go. Not with drama, not with a sound, just gone. She stood at the gate for a moment longer, in the cold Seoul morning, with the Han River behind the estate and the city beginning its day all around her. Then she went inside. She went to the studio. She opened her sketchbook to a clean page. She drew. 2 months later, Joon-Ho called her to his study. She knew before she got there that something was different, not from his tone. He had one tone, controlled and even, but from Director Shin's face, which had the particular brightness of someone holding good news with both hands and trying not to drop it. There was a document on the desk. Read it, he said. She read it. Business registration, fashion house, 3rd floor of the Kang estate, fully staffed, fully funded, operational immediately, under the name Amara Osei. She read it twice. She looked up. My mother's studio, he said. She spent 10 years in that room trying to build something. She never got to finish it. He held her gaze. I think she would have liked you to. Amara pressed her lips together. She had promised herself no more crying. She was aware this promise was about to cost her. Joon-Ho, the space is yours. The staff is yours. What you build is yours. Entirely, legally, completely yours. No conditions. He paused. I would like to be present for what comes next, if you want that. But that is your decision and only yours. She put the document down. She walked around the desk. She stood in front of him. Close. Closer than she had allowed herself before. Close enough that she could see the thing in his eyes that he kept so carefully managed and that had been slipping, incrementally, since the night of the thunderstorm. And she said, You are asking me to stay. I am asking you to choose, he said. There is a significant difference. If you want to leave, the house, the marriage, the city, all of it, I will give you everything you need to build this life somewhere that has nothing to do with me. That offer is real. It has no conditions. He stopped. Something in his face, some last controlled thing, came loose. But if you stay, I want you to stay knowing that I see you. Knowing that whatever I was before you walked into this room and told me to speak to your face, I am not that now. Knowing that the reason I am not that now is entirely because of you. She looked at him. She thought about the 9-year-old girl on the airplane, the mattress, the sketchbook, the name she had to read on the cover sometimes to remember it fully belonged to her. She thought about every room she had stood in that had not been hers. She thought about this room, this man, this strange, precise, armored man who had watched a light come on in a dark studio and said nothing, and refolded the fabric and put up a cork board and sat outside her door in the middle of the night and told an entire room to remember her name. She thought about what it meant to be chosen, not placed, not assigned, not handed from one pair of hands to another. Chosen. I choose, she said. It was the simplest sentence she had ever spoken. It was the most important. Joon-Ho exhaled, slow, long, and completely unguarded. The breath of a man setting down something he has been carrying since a parking structure 18 months ago, since longer than that, since the first day he decided that needing people was a vulnerability he could not afford. He took her hand. Both of them were very still for a moment. Then she laughed, just slightly, just the small surprised laugh of a person who has discovered that joy, when it finally arrives, feels nothing like you expected it to feel and everything like coming home. And he looked at her face when she laughed, and something happened in his expression that Director Shin, watching from the doorway, would later describe to Jeon and Sora in the kitchen as the most astonishing thing he had ever seen in 12 years of working for this man. He smiled, real, slow, unhurried, like a man who has just remembered that there was something worth smiling about. The launch of the Amara Osei atelier happened on a Friday in late autumn, with the Han River outside holding the last gold of the day and refusing to let it go. 27 pieces, each one extraordinary, each one carrying the particular signature of a designer who had spent years developing a vision in the only available studio, the private space of her own mind, and was now, for the first time, speaking out loud. The room went quiet, in the way rooms go quiet when they encounter something genuine. Not polite quiet, not impressed quiet, the quiet of people who have been surprised into actual feeling. Joon-Ho attended. He had not spoken publicly in 18 months. When the last piece had moved through the room and the quiet was at its deepest, he picked up the microphone. "Everything in this room was designed by my wife," he said. His voice was the same as it always was, low even, carrying its own weight without effort. "I suggest you remember her name." Amara stood at the edge of the runway. She looked at him across the room. He looked back at her. The room erupted. She smiled. Not the careful, managed, make-yourself-smaller smile of a woman who has been taught that taking up space is presumptuous. The full, open, uncontained smile of a woman who has decided that she is allowed to be exactly as much as she is. On a morning 3 months later, Han River Silver outside the studio window, Amara was at the work table with coffee and her sketchbook when Joon-Ho came in. He set a second cup beside her elbow without a word. He looked at what she was drawing, a dress, structured at the shoulder, fluid from the waist, the kind of dress that says arrival. "Client?" he asked. "Me," she said. He looked at it more carefully. It was a wedding dress. "I never had a real one," she said. "I would like one. Something small, chosen. People we actually want there. Vows we actually mean." She looked up at him. "If you are available." Kang Joon-Ho, who had run a syndicate from a wheelchair and buried the woman he had once been meant to marry, and spent 18 months building a wall around everything soft in him, and had been taken apart, piece by careful piece, by a woman with calloused hands and a worn sketchbook, looked at his wife in the early morning light of his mother's studio, and smiled. "Tell me what you need," he said. She did. He gave her all of it. There was a courtyard and late autumn light, and 12 people who mattered. Director Shin cried behind his glasses and categorically denied it. Jeon and Sora wore matching expressions of profound satisfaction. Madame Seo arrived early, arranged every flower personally, and said to Amara before the ceremony, in a voice barely above breath, "She would have been glad. Hana, she would have been glad for you." Amara took her hand and held it. That was all. It was everything. Amara wore the dress she had designed herself, and it was exactly what she had known it would be. Not a performance, not a costume, but a statement. This is who I am. This is what I am capable of. This is what I have always been capable of, in every room where no one was looking. Joon-Ho held her hand at the altar with the grip of a man who has decided something completely and permanently. They said vows this time, chosen ones. The kind that only means something when the two people saying them have already proven them through every ordinary and extraordinary day of the months preceding the words. When it was over, standing in the courtyard with the Han River beyond the walls, catching the late afternoon light, he leaned close to her and said quietly, "The night you walked into that room and told me to speak to your face." She looked at him. "I had decided," he said, "before you arrived, that this was a transaction, a necessary thing, that I would be correct, professional, that it would not cost me anything." He paused. "You spoke 4 sentences, and I understood that I had made a significant miscalculation." She laughed. "The first time I saw your face," he said, "I thought, this is not the woman I was promised." "It wasn't?" she said. "No," he said, "it was considerably more. The girl nobody saw, the man nobody could reach. A house that had been full of cold and silence and the preserved grief of people who did not know how to put their losses down. Now full of the particular warmth of 2 people who had chosen each other with full knowledge of the cost and the weight and the history, and chosen anyway. Neither of them had expected the other. Neither of them, not for a single day of what came after, would trade it. If you stayed until the very last word, then you already know what this story did to you, and you do not need me to describe it. Hit the like button right now. Leave a comment below and tell me the moment that got you. Was it the thunderstorm? The studio light coming on? The microphone? The courtyard? Was it the moment he said it was considerably more? I want to know which moment lived in you. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell, because this is what we do here every single week. Stories that stay with you. Stories that mean something. Stories about people who were told they were not enough and decided, against every evidence, that they were. Next week's story is already waiting for you. I will see you there.